The engines awoke to find that nothing had changed. It had been raining every day since Percy the little green engine had gone missing. His stall had been empty for 3 weeks now, and this made the other engines feel miserable. Work continued as usual on the railway, but all the engines missed Percy dearly. Henry and Duck rested in the sheds that morning before they left to fetch their trains. Henry was cross.
"If you ask me, the Topham Hatt isn't doing enough to find Percy," he said. "What we need is something more."
Duck rolled his eyes. Every morning since the two had made their pact, Henry had talked non-stop about the issues he had taken with Sir Topham Hatt's plan to locate Percy. While Duck agreed with Henry in some ways, he also knew that Sir Topham Hatt was doing all he could. "What more can he do, Henry?" Duck replied. "We can't search every track at all hours of the day, it's just not possible." Henry was indignant.
"Why not?" asked Henry. "There are dozens of old railway lines on this island that Percy could have found. If no one ever goes down those lines, how will we ever know?"
"You're asking the impossible," Duck fumed. "I know you miss Percy, but when are we going to have time to do what you ask? We don't even know if those old lines are safe."
"That's saying a lot from someone who works on a minuscule coastal branch line. All you do is explore and take in the sights. I'd be happy to let others worry about Percy if I worked at the beach too." "Humph!" Duck snorted.
Henry pulled out of the sheds without another word.
"Simmer down, boy." "I'm trying," Duck replied, "but Henry makes me so cross."
"He's grieving, Duck."
"Grieving?"
Duck asked. "In his heart he's afraid that Percy is gone forever, and it's driving him mad. Just give him time." "Easier said than done," Duck said, but he said it to himself. In his heart, he was afraid of the same thing.
"There are dozens of old railway lines on this island that Percy could have found. If no one ever goes down those lines, how will we ever know?"
"What more can he do, Henry? I know you miss Percy. We don't even know if those old lines are safe." Every day, Henry's goods train runs through the junction where the main line meets Thomas's branch line. Henry enjoyed stopping here to talk to Thomas, who he hadn't seen much since Thomas left to run his branch line. Today, however, Thomas was nowhere to be found. "That's strange," said Henry's driver. "Thomas must be running late today."
"He promised he'd be here. I told him I'd finish my story about the flying kipper." "Well, I'm sorry, old boy. I'm afraid we'll have to keep going. We can't wait for Thomas or we risk running late too." Henry frowned. Meeting Thomas at the junction was his way of satisfying his part of the pact he had made with Duck. Thomas had been late before, but since Percy had gone missing, this made Henry worry. He had not forgotten the words that Percy had said to him many weeks ago. He hoped against hope that Thomas was okay. Seeing that Thomas still had not come,
Henry reluctantly agreed with his driver and set off with his train back to the harbor. Duck was busy shunting trucks in the yard when Henry returned. "Hello, Henry," Duck called from the sidings. "You do look glum." "I am, Duck." And he told him about Thomas. "Oh, Thomas can be a little lazy in the morning, Henry. I wouldn't think much of it." Henry sighed. The two sat in silence for some time. Henry and Duck were thinking about their argument earlier that morning. Finally, Henry spoke. "I'm sorry for calling your branch line silly, Duck. You really are a useful engine, and I should know that. I had forgotten that you came all the way from your branch line to help in the yard since Percy's gone missing." Duck smiled. "Don't worry, Henry. I'm not mad at you. My driver told me that you were just worried. I am too. We all are. But you need to understand that we are all in this together, and we are doing all we can." "You're right, Duck. I'm just an old fusspot. Not being able to speak to Thomas just has me worried, and even though it seems like everything is bleak, at least we have each other." And with that, the two engines went back to their duties. Later that day, Duck shunted Gordon's coaches in the station platform, ready for the big engine to take the afternoon express to carry all the hard-working passengers from their places of work to their homes across the island. Much like Henry stopping at the junction to see Thomas, Duck shunted Gordon's coaches every day to ensure that he could keep a close eye on Gordon, too. Duck waited and waited, but Gordon wouldn't come. "The clock says 5:01, Duck said. "Where is Gordon?" Henry, Donald, and Douglas looked from afar. "Come on, Gordon," Henry said under his breath. Finally, Gordon's whistle could be heard from the yards.
Trucks! Trucks!
Gordon sputtered. The engine sighed in relief and laughed.
"I don't know how Percy makes them behave so well, but I can't stand them. And now I'll have to make up for lost time."
"Maybe if you scrap your tender and paint yourself green, they won't give you so much trouble, Gordon."
Ha! Trucks are for silly tank engines, not big strong engines like me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an express to pull. "Come on, come on, come on," Gordon said to his coaches.
Gordon gave a long whistle and was out of sight. "See you soon," Duck whistled in return.
"I see Gordon is off with the express. That's good. I'll help you shunt the rest of these trucks, and then we'll get a well-deserved rest."
The engines worked hard for the rest of the afternoon and returned to the sheds. The day had been long and difficult. The two engines were exhausted and failed to sleep at once. That night, Henry had a strange dream. he found himself deep in a valley between two great towering rock walls. All around him were sickly-looking trees, and the sky was dark and gray. The track seemed to go on forever. But then he saw a familiar shape far in the distance.
Percy?
"Hello, Henry," Percy replied. Henry could tell that Percy sounded scared.
Percy, what's wrong? Where have you been?
"I can't tell you that, Henry. They won't let me."
Who, Percy? Who is this you speak of?
Percy looked from side to side, as if looking for someone in the shadows. "I'm in enough trouble as it is, Henry, and I'm bound to be in more trouble still for meeting you here."
I don't understand. Who were you in trouble with, Percy?
"All I can say, Henry, is that there are two. They're looking for four, and soon they'll have three. There's one left, Henry. Save them." High above the two engines came a peculiar sound. Henry looked down and saw that Percy was terrified. "I've got to go, Henry. Goodbye."
There are two. They're looking for four. And soon they'll have three. Thomas.
Henry desperately wanted to talk to Thomas about his strange dream. He felt more worried than ever. But when they got there, the station was eerily quiet, except for the sound of birds chirping in the trees.
Late again?
Henry's driver said. "This isn't like Thomas."
No, Henry said sadly. It isn't.
He was beginning to have a terrible feeling, but he didn't want to think about it.
Let's go, Henry said.
When the day's work is over, Henry often rests near the docks at the harbor to listen to the sound of the waves and the gulls. It was nothing like the forest, but he loved it just the same. Henry's heart felt heavy. As he looked out into the waves, he was reminded of the time Percy passed the warning board and fell into the sea. Henry had been there to take him to the works to be cleaned.
I used to tease him about it all the time, Henry said to his driver. I'd say, mind the seawater, Percy is liable to give you boiler ache.
His driver laughed.
Percy's a good engine. He really looks up to you, Henry.
Henry smiled. He was very fond of the little engine. He was fond of Thomas, too. Henry had a big heart, and even though the little engines could annoy him at times, he always cared deeply for them. Presently, Duck pulled up alongside Henry. "Any luck with Thomas?" Duck asked.
"No,"
Henry said plainly.
"Late again."
Both engines sighed.
"Has Gordon left with the express?"
"Yes, he left a few hours ago," Duck replied.
"That's good."
Duck looked at Henry. He looked weary. Duck could tell that he had a lot on his mind. "We'll find Percy," Duck said. "I promise." The two engines heard the familiar sound of Sir Topham Hatt's car approaching. When he stepped out of the car, he looked concerned.
"Jock, Henry," he said. "Oh, I'm glad I found you here. We have a problem."
That terrible feeling that Henry had had earlier began to come back.
Problem, sir?"
Henry said.
"Yes,"
Sir Topham Hatt replied.
"I've gotten numerous reports of trains standing still on the line. Trains without engines."
"Which trains, sir?" Duck asked. But Duck's question was answered before the Fat Controller could reply. Donald and Douglas pulled into the yard side by side. Donald was pulling Annie and Clarabelle, and Douglas was pulling Gordon's express coaches. Sir Topham Hatt began explaining what this meant, but Duck and Henry weren't listening. They knew who the trains belonged to.